Commissioner Paula R. Reed. They are our guests this evening. But first, the F.R.E.S.H Conversation is brought to you by the Entertainment Coalition, Fresh Book Festivals 2021, Dante Productions, and JAW Promotions. Next event, Strings and Things, on Saturday, April 18th, 2020 at Bank and Blues. And Just For You Productions, Inc. Next event, Broadway promotion at the Orman Theater of the Arts on Saturday, April 18th, 2020. And Covita Gray, who is the Adams Home Sales Associates, 386-222-0377. Call her if you need a new home. Call her if you need information. That number's 386-222-0377. And we're going to get started. Good evening, ladies.
Good evening, Donna. Good evening.
Good evening.
Donna.
How are you?
Great.
Great. So I'm so glad for you to be here this evening.
Yes.
You are history in the making. Still, right? Still.
Yes.
And so we want you to tell us take a few minutes and tell us about yourself. And then Commissioner Reed and I are going to ask you some questions.
All right. My name is Senorita W. Locklear, and I worked at Bethune-Cookman for 43 years.
Wow.
And go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, starting with secretary to the academic dean and ending up as executive secretary to the president.
So when you were a young lady, did you envision yourself being involved in an administrative assistant position at the college?
No, I didn't. I really didn't know what I was going to do, but it was through Mr. Saxon, Maxwell W. Saxon, that came to me and encouraged me to come to Bethune-Cookman. We need persons with the talent that you have, and I considered it, and I came.
And what was that interview process like?
I was nervous, of course, but not anymore.
Mm.
Senorita served us well too, Donna. I was a student when she was. When
Oh,
she worked
really?
there. Yes.
Okay.
during her tenure.
Yes.
So who gave you your interview?
For the job at Bethune-Cookman?
That's correct.
President Richard V. Moore.
Oh, my goodness.
Uh-huh.
Now, he is an icon also.
Always
Yes.
an icon.
And you were nervous.
Nervous.
Do you remember his first question?
Why do you want to work at Bethune-Cookman?
And you said...
Because Mr. Saxon asked me.
Mr. Saxon told me to.
That was true.
Yeah, that was
That
true,
was
right?
true,
Yeah.
yes.
And so, Richard V. Moore, I don't know a whole lot about him, but I do know that people hold him in very high esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Very high esteem.
Yes.
I'll tell you one of my favorite things to say about President Moore is when I was talking with Dr. Alvin I. Smith, who was chief of oncology at F.R.E.S.H Hospital. He told me, he said, there are two things about Dr. Richard V. Moore. He knows how to raise money. And whenever he speaks, it's factual. He said, I know because Dr. Moore was the first black to serve on the board at Halifax Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And when he would come to meetings, Dr. Smith said when he would talking for the African Americans, he had his material. And Dr. Smith said, after the meeting, I would check on what he said. He said when he spoke, he knew what he was saying. He just didn't talk off the top of his head. And number two, I'm a lot richer now that he can't speak. Because Dr. Moore was one you cannot refuse. He said, I give him credit for those two things, very factual and raising money.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was someone that I wish I could have spent time with.
Well, you missed it by not
I
knowing
know.
him
Yes,
very
exactly.
much.
And so tell us, we talked a bit, 1 second. So we are not Facebook Live this evening. If you would like to ask Ms. Locklear a question, please call at 516-8030, or download the app to Joy 106.3 FM. And so we talked briefly about being a secretary and what that really means. I mean, I think a lot of people now look at it as not an important position, but we
It's
both
very
know that
important.
that's not true.
True.
So the question,
Yes.
go ahead.
I'd like to say that the job classification secretary is probably the most misunderstood term in office occupation. A typist is not a secretary. And that is important. A lot of people think because you can type, but there's more to being a secretary than being a typist. You have to know spelling, English, math, reading, composing letters, greeting the public, answering the telephone properly, and dressing appropriately.
Yes, ma'am.
It really makes a difference.
It makes a difference.
It makes a difference.
It sets the tone for the
It
office.
sets the tone for the office.
Professionalism.
A first impression is a lasting impression. I
It's
tell
a
my
front line.
student
It's a front line.
when they walk in that office, the first impression is a lasting one. So be at your best.
That's right.
But there, no chewing gum, no gossiping, no talking, and all of that. There's more to it.
And so let's go back to that. So one of the things when I was an admin to a gentleman in a very high position, he said, if I ever hear anything that comes out of this office, we don't even have to talk. Pack your bag. Confidentiality was everything, right?
That was the first thing I told my students, workers, when they came in. Once you cross that threshold going out of the office, forget everything that happened. If someone asks you a question, simply say, I don't know. Because if I hear of anything that is your job, that was the one thing that I told my student workers when they came into work. Right.
Very, very important, the
Very,
confidentiality.
Very
Because you have a one-on-one relationship with the
Right.
person that you're working for, man or
That's
woman.
right. That's
Right? And a lot of things that they tell you or you have to do or you have to schedule are things that they don't want the general public to know about.
That's right.
Yeah, it's very important.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I
Don't
don't know.
ask me, I don't know.
That's right.
Ask Senorita.
That's
Don't ask
it.
me.
Right. So tell us where you were prior to Bethune-Cookman.
Well, that was my first job, was at Bethune-Cookman.
Okay.
And I worked 3 other places. I worked at Prairie View A&M University
Really?
in Prairie View,
Texas.
Texas. I worked for Bendix Corporation at the Space Center. And most importantly, for Mrs. Mary McLeod Bethune.
So tell
and
us.
that's the reason I'm here.
Right. Tell us, so how did you first meet her? How did that happen?
No, I didn't know her. I was working at Prairie View.
Oh.
And she wrote me a letter saying that President Moore had recommended me very highly. She was in need of a private secretary. And if I would be interested in coming back to work for her.
What
And
an
I
honor.
responded by saying I
Wow.
appreciated the offer. However, I was under contract. My contract expired on May 31st. And if the position was still open at that time, I would be happy to consider it. She answered me and said, I will wait for you because that lets me know where your loyalty is. You did not say, because I was Mary McLeod Bethune, when do you want me to come? You were under contract. So she said, I will wait for you. And thus, I came to work for her on June 1, 1954.
Wow. What an honor for
And-
her to ask for you.
Right.
And wait for you.
And wait for you.
And wait for me.
Yes.
And that 11 months and 2.5 weeks was the most rewarding experience that I will ever have. Nobody knows what it's like. I started as her private secretary, and at the time of her passing, I was her private / business secretary.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I came to work for her, she had two secretaries, a private secretary and a business secretary. Mrs. Mitchell was her business secretary. And a couple of months before she passed away, she called me in the office and she said, Senorita, I don't see the need for having two secretaries. When I get ready for one thing, I'll ask you, and when I get ready for another, I'll ask Mrs. Mitchell. I think I have been watching you, and I think that you could serve as both. Do you think so? So I said, I'll try.
Mm-hmm.
She called Mrs. Mitchell to tell her her decision,
Mm-hmm.
and Mrs. Mitchell told her, sure, but give me 2 or 3 weeks to bring your books up, your ledgers up to date,
Mm-hmm.
so that when I turn them over to Senorita, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
She brought the books up in about 3.5 weeks. And this is the most memorable thing to me with Mrs. Bethune. She handed me the ledgers and she said, here, Senorita, I want you to study all of my financial situations. And when I ask you anything about my finances, I want you to answer. She said, think of yourself as Mrs. Bethune.
Okay.
And that I was in awe, and that was the most memorable thing that she could have ever told me.
Mm-hmm.
Think of yourself as Mrs. Bethune.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a dual role after that, private/business secretary.
18 months.
18 months.
18 months.
Not 18 months. 11 months and 3 weeks.
11 months.
11 and
months
3
and 3 weeks.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But memorable.
But
Yes.
very memorable. And I'd like to talk more about her on a personal side.
Okay.
Mhm.
We know her as an educator and as a humanitarian and helping others, but very few people know her personal life.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, Mrs. Bethune preferred to be called Mrs. Bethune. Those who knew her well didn't address her as Dr. Bethune.
Mm-hmm.
She did not object to being called Dr. Bethune, but her preference was Mrs. Bethune. And that's what the people closest to her addressed her as Mrs. Bethune.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to,
It's your show. Talk about what you want.
okay. Number one, Mrs. Bethune started the day by reading the Upper Room, which is a daily inspirational guide.
Mhm.
We started every morning with the reading of the Upper Room, and I want to say President Moore carried that tradition on during his tenure.
Mm-hmm.
And after that,
Oh, that's no.
What?
That's a
Mhm.
spiritual. That
Yes,
was a
yes,
song.
yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Oh, and I want to talk about her family. Mrs. Bethune loved her family.
Mm-hmm.
She was family oriented. When her great grandchildren would come in to the office, they'd come in maybe once a week and come over to see her after school. And she would just embrace them and say, hi, Ma, what did you do today? Her eyes would light up, and I don't care what she was doing when they walked in the room for those 5 minutes. She stopped
Mm-hmm.
and embraced them and talked with them, and her eyes would just sparkle. And I don't know if many of you, well, you probably don't know her, but her eyes told a story. Her eyes were not black or brown. They were a greenish blue.
Really?
She had the
Wow.
most penetrating eyes that you would want to see.
That's funny you would say that because most of her pictures portray her as being a very stern,
Mm-hmm.
stern-looking woman. And you're telling us that actually she had a soft side that most people didn't see, right?
Very, very soft side. And her visitors were predominantly white. Very few blacks came in to see her. With Daytona Beach being a tourist town, some would come to renew their acquaintance, others would come to meet her for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite stories about her is this white lady came in one day, the doorbell rang. I went to the door and she said, she told me her name, and she had her little girl who was about 4 years old. And she said, I'm from Minnesota. We are visiting Daytona Beach, and I brought my little girl here today because I want her to be able to say when she grows up, I met Mrs. Bethune and shook her hand.
Mm.
Now, that was white, and daily, the whites, there was a constant flow of whites coming in to see her. So I showed them into the office, and I told them Mrs. Bethune was having her dinner, and when she finished her dinner, she would be back in the office.
Mm-hmm.
I went in and told Mrs. Bethune that there was a lady there with her little girl who wanted her to meet you, and she said, oh, don't have them wait. Show them in.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so I went back to the office and I got them, and as I was taking them into the dining room, Mrs. Bethune was sitting at the head of the dining room table, and the lady walked toward the dining room table, and she was trying to get her little girl to go up. She was prodding her, and she was stubborn. She was backing off. Mrs. Bethune put her silver down and stretched her arms and said, come here, my little angel. She walked straight into her arms as if she were magnetized.
Really?
That was the most beautiful picture before and after.
Yes.
Now, her presence, that's just what her eyes, her warmth, all she did was stretch her arms.
Mm-hmm.
That little girl walked straight into her and she embraced her. And that was a beautiful thing.
Beautiful moment. Yes.
Hmm.
But I always will believe that Mrs. Bethune felt her death.
Coming.
Yes, on May 18th, she did 3 things that are most unusual. After a devotion, she called me into the office, and let me back up. When I came to work for her, Doubleday Publishing Company had sent an author, Rickham Holt, to do the biography of her life. Her biography. Rickham had been there several months before I came. Rickham would come over and talk with her maybe once or twice a week, and some weekends they would go to Bethune-Volusia Beach for the peace and quiet, and she would talk with her. Rickham would go back to her room, write the chapter. She did it chapter by chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And as she finished a chapter, she would bring it over to Mrs. Bethune for Mrs. Bethune to edit.
Okay.
Mrs. Bethune would edit it, and she would go back, and of course back then they had the typewriters.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Back and forth.
She would do it in 3 copies. The original was mailed to Doubleday. Rickham kept a copy, and Mrs. Bethune kept the copy.
Okay, we're going to put a period right there. We're going to take a station break really quickly. Station break, we'll be right back.
The following show is a sponsor of Joy 106.3. Joy 106.3, its parent company, Rima Broadcasting Inc., its owners and associates take no responsibility for the opinions or statements made by the talk show hosts, callers, or their guests. Statements or show topics are not necessarily the beliefs of this radio station.
We are back with Miss Locklear, and we're going to continue our conversation about the book.
As I said, Rickham would do the chapter after Mrs. Bethune had edited. She would do it in the final copy. She kept the original went to Doubleday. She kept a copy, and she gave Mrs. Bethune a copy. And that morning, Mrs. Bethune called me in, and she said, Senorita, how many chapters has Rickham written on my life? And I said, I can't remember. I'll have to go to the safe to get the copies, and I'll let you know. So she said, will you get them out for me? I said, sure. I went to the safe, In those days, Mrs. Bethune had a safe in her office that she kept all of her important papers in. I went to the safe and I got the chapters. Rackham had completed, I think, about 5. And she said, "Have a seat here." I sat right at her desk. She said, "Will you read them to me?" And I said, "But remember, Mrs. Bethune, you hear each chapter before it goes to Doubleday." She said, "Yes, but that's in bits and pieces. I'll hear one chapter this week, and maybe 5 or 6 weeks later, I'll hear another chapter." She said, "I want to hear them all together."
Okay.
So I sat there and I started reading. And as I was reading to her, Miss Divers came in, who was a professor at Bethune-Cookman, and Mrs. Bethune was her mentor. And she said, "Mary, do you have any more classes?" She said, "Not until this afternoon." And she said, "Senorita's reading my biography, but she has her work to do. Do you mind sitting here and take over where she's left off?" She said, "Sure, I'll do that." So Miss Divers took my seat, and I went back to my desk, and I looked back at Mrs. Bethune. I couldn't watch her while I was reading, but I watched, and she was leaning back in her chair with her eyes closed and smiling. And on that morning, she heard every chapter together that had been sent to Doubleday for publishing. That's number 1. Number 2, I had been there 11 months and 2 weeks, and she said, when I came in to work, she was telling me what was in the safe, and one document was her will. She had revised her will. She said her will was about 30 years old, and she had revised it, and it was there before I came. She said, "I think I'll sign that will today. Will you get it out for me?" So I said, "Sure." I got the will out, and she said, "I want to read it once more before I fix my signature." So I gave it to her, and she sat there at the desk. And before she started reading, she said, "Do you think you are familiar enough with my financial affairs to tell me what I need to know?" And I said, "I think so." She said, "Okay, I'm depending on you." Then she started reading the will. And she said, "I have a pain in my chest." And she put her hand, I looked back at her on her desk, and she put her hand. So I said, "Well, Mrs. Bethune, get up and walk around. Maybe it'll go away." She said, "Okay." And she got up from the desk, went to the front porch, and sat in there were 3 rocking chairs on the front porch. She sat in one of the rocking chairs, and she said, "I'm feeling better." And in a few minutes, she told her niece to come in and tell me to move the papers off her desk. She said, "She'll know what I mean. Just tell her to move the papers." And I got up and I took the will, put it back in the safe. She never signed it. She got up from the front porch and she went into the bathroom. She was in the bathroom when I was getting ready to leave. I walked to the bathroom door and I knocked on the door, and she said, I said, "Mrs. Bethune, I'm leaving now." She said, "Open the door." I opened the door. She looked up at me and said, "I'll see you in the morning. That will forever ring." She never made it out. She passed away about 20 minutes after I had left work. And she looked up at me and said, "I'll see you in the morning." And those were the last words that she spoke.
I know.
Yes. And when I was coming back, I had to go to the post office, so I didn't go directly home. And as I was coming back, I heard the bell, but I didn't distinguish between a toll and a ring.
Right.
She passed on a Wednesday, and every Wednesday there was prayer meeting in the chapel at 7, and at 6:30 the bell would start ringing to let the students know it was time to head into Whitehall for a prayer meeting. And when the cashier walked out and told me, waved me down and said, "Senorita, Mrs. Bethune is dead," I just could not believe it. And when I got over there, they were bringing her body out of the foundation. Now, she did those three things on that day, which led me to believe that she felt that then, even though she didn't sign that will, she did hear all of the chapters that Rackham had written about her life, and she was at peace. That's what I say. Now, I want to tell you about some experiences she told me about that happened. She said in the 40s there was a speaker at the City Auditorium in Orlando that she wanted to hear. So she got a chauffeur to drive her over to the City Auditorium in Orlando. When she got there, she got out of the car with her cane, and boy, could she strut. Her shoulders were back. She had
She could
that
do that
cane,
now. She could do
and
that,
she strutted.
for sure.
She said, I got out, walked into the auditorium. When I got to the door, there was a sign that said Negroes in the back, and there was one front said whites. She said, I walked down front and I sat on the second row from the front. I'm sitting there waiting for the program to start. Someone tapped her on her shoulder and she looked up, and it was one of the white ushers, and he told her, this section is reserved for whites. She said, I looked up at him and said, I know, I can read. And I turned around and I did not move. Yeah. And I told her, I said, well, maybe when the usher went and told them, there's a Negro sitting down there won't move, someone recognized her and knew who she was.
Absolutely.
And I know that's why, but they
walk softly but carried a big stick.
That's right. That is so right. Mm-hmm. Another one of my favorites, and I'm going to let you...
No, you talk.
Yeah, talk.
Is Mr. Rodriguez, whom she had brought from Miami. Mr. Rodriguez said that he was working in a drugstore in Miami. Mrs. Bethune came down to speak. And she started talking with him, and when she found out that he had not gone to college, he was working in the drugstore, and she told him to come to Daytona Beach, and he could go to Bethune-Cookman, and she would take care of him. And he came to Bethune-Cookman, and he was Mr. Bethune's butler. Mr. Rod said that he got Mr. Bethune's clothes out for him every day, shoes, shiny shoes, and do everything for him. So Mr. Rod, after he graduated from Morehouse, he went into the service, and when he came out of the service, he had saved his money. Mrs. Bethune told me this. He gave her a check, and he said, here, Mrs. Bethune, this is yours. I've saved my money. He said, had it not been for you, I wouldn't be where I am today. She said, Senorita, I couldn't take it. She said, no, Rod, you keep it. And as long as you have a stake, I know that I will have a stake. That's just what she didn't accept. She said, I wouldn't take one penny, but she knew that that was what he wanted. But getting back to her family, she could not see, they could not see in themselves what Mrs. Bethune saw in them. They were so busy doing what they wanted to do. And she told me one day, she said, Senorita, she said, if my son and grandson were right, she said, my son should be president of Bethune-Cookman, and my grandson should be the business manager. She said, but where are they? They're out doing what they want to do, not realizing the importance
The legacy.
of
Yes.
that's right. That is so true. And one other thing I want to say. One day I was in for dictation, and I sensed that she was troubled. I could see an expression on her face, and I said, "Are you all right?" She said, "Yes, but I'm a little worried." She looked at me and she said, "Senorita, you don't have any children, do you?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, I'll tell you this. If you ever have any children, there is a tie between a mother and her children that nobody can break. I don't care how hard they try. And I don't care how many times they fall, I'm going to be there with a helping hand." And she reached down to raise them up and let them start again. She said, "That is what being a mother means to me."
Yeah, that's a mother's love.
She loved her family, and she just couldn't understand why, they were so busy doing what they had to do when they realized that she had passed away. And I told Albert one day, "I know Mrs. Bethune is smiling down on you because he turned his life around and changed and became the man that he was supposed to be, but it was too late for her."
Some of us are 18-wheelers, and it takes us a long time to
Yeah,
make that turn.
That's right.
But
That's-
sometimes it's too late, little too late. Right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I am so sorry that she didn't live to see the day that Albert turned his life around.
This is wonderful listening.
I know, I
firsthand to Senorita and her experiences.
I know.
Thank you so
It's-
much.
You know, if you guys don't
Oh.
think that this is a Black history fact right here, you're crazy. You should have your telephones on record because this information is vital to our history.
Go on, Senorita. Tell us more.
Yeah. We're like
Okay.
little kids at your feet.
First-hand information.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'll say this. When Mrs. Bethune passed away, Betty was pregnant. That's Albert's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, they weren't given sonograms, so they didn't know what it was going to be. When she came and she was a little girl, they named her Mary. Most people know, but Mary is named for her great-grandmother, Mary Bethune.
Mm-hmm.
And one day she could write the most beautiful letters with so much wisdom, and no letter was the same. You know, some people, you can look at a letter and say, "I know who wrote this." They got a trademark, certain things they always say.
Mm-hmm.
But each letter that Mrs. Bethune wrote was entirely different, just full of wisdom. And one day I told her, I said, "Mrs. Bethune, you know, your letters are too precious, and they have so much wisdom just for the person you're writing." I said, "Have you ever thought about publishing your letters?" And that's what I was in the process of doing when she passed away, because they were just awesome. It's unbelievable. Shoot.
I would love to get a handwritten letter now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nobody
yes.
does it anymore. I do try to do thank you notes,
Mm-hmm.
but even that sometimes slips away. So let me just ask you this, Senorita.
Okay.
Tell us about how she did so much with so little.
Faith and determination. And she believed in herself. And I often think about the poem that Bunker used to say, "When a man is determined, what can stop him?" She did not let anything stop her. She did not back down to anybody. And it was reciprocated because the whites, you don't realize how much they respected her. Most of her engagements were predominantly white audiences. She didn't, during that 11 months in the 50s, the blacks, I should say it, but we didn't appreciate her just as the whites did. She was in demand, and she enjoyed every moment of it.
Wow.
And her last trip overseas was to Switzerland in the summer, not the spring, before she passed away. There is an organization called Moral Rearmament, and that was founded by Dr. Frank Buckman. The headquarters is in Mackinac Island, Michigan, and they have an annual meeting in Switzerland every year. She attended that meeting, and Moral Rearmament lived by 4 absolute standards: absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, absolute love, and absolute honesty. Those 4 principles they lived by daily. And she said when she joined MRA, it gave her a different outlook on life. She cared more, she loved more, she appreciated her family, but Moral Rearmament really made a difference in her life, and that was the last trip that she made before she passed away, was to the annual meeting of MRA, founded by Dr. Frank Buckman.
Tell us about her status in the community. I know it was a tumultuous time, and there were
Yes.
places that blacks could not go, but she was able to navigate.
Yes, that was just her persona. She had that very, very few people have, and she was respected for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about the students at that time. I know they're nothing like the students now, not negative or positive, but tell us about how hungry they were to learn and be a part.
You would be surprised, not about her, but because, believe it or not, there were some students. I met a student one day. She was a senior at Bethune-Cookman, and she had never been to the foundation. But she was not alone. There were many others. We didn't stress black history in the 50s as we do now. It wasn't taught in the public schools, anything, so they knew. But being on the campus, there was, and that troubled her. It really did. It troubled her. But I said, "Oh, Mrs. Bethune, they'll come around one day." That's it as far as knowing Mrs. Bethune, who she is, and what a pleasure would be to be in her presence.
Wow, I would have
That was
loved to
near.
have, loved
Oh
to
my
have met her.
goodness!
I
Yeah,
know,
Yes,
I know.
yes.
So what was Bethune-Cookman like after she passed? How long were you there afterwards?
Until I retired. No. Oh. No, except for the stint at the Space Center.
Yeah, tell us about that, Senorita. That was very interesting when you told me about that story.
Oh, about that. There was a young man whose name is Fisher. He was from Daytona. Well, he lived in Daytona after he was going to school. He was a science major, and when he graduated, he got a job working for Bendix Corporation at the Space Center. And he came in the office one day, and he said, "Senorita," he said, "we don't have any black secretaries at Bendix Corporation. And they're saying they don't have any because they can't find anybody qualified." He said, "I want you to try them." He said, "and if they don't get you, then we have grounds for a suit because we know."
Exactly.
So I took off from work one day, And I went down and I applied for a job. I didn't tell them that I was working. I just had my home telephone number and address. And about 2 weeks after I had applied, I came home from work and there was a telegram in my mailbox. The telegram said, "We have been unsuccessful in our attempts to reach you. Will you please call us at your earliest convenience?" I hadn't called because they were calling during working hours. That was the number that I had left. So the next day on my lunch hour, I called Bendix, and they told me that they had received my scores, and they were very impressed, and they wanted me to come down for an interview. So I went down for the interview.
You took another day off.
And I told her.
You took another day off.
Yeah, I took another day off. These were personal days. And I told them, I said, "I'm not looking for a job." I said, "I have a job." And they said, "But we would really, really like to have you. Do you think it's possible?" So I said, "Well, I don't know. I'll talk with President Moore." So when I got back, I told President Moore the 2 days that I had taken off at different times for personal leave. I told him what I had done. And he said, "Well, go on, Senorita." He said, "Because if you go, it might open the door for some others." And he said, "If you don't like it, you can always come back." So I went down. And one day during the holidays, my doorbell rang, and it was President Moore. He said, "Senorita, I know I told you that if you didn't like it, you could come back." He said, "But I'm asking you to come back now." He said, "I have had 3 persons, and they are not secretaries. They cannot do." And I said, "Thank you." And I said, "But President, I'm no longer secretary. I have a promotion. I am a coordinator for procedures. Whatever your salary is, I will match it." That's exactly what he told me. And that's how I got back to Bethune. And he said, "I'll give your husband a job too."
He worked in
That's what I'm talking about.
And that's
connected.
And that's what it's. So if you do a job well done,
well.
Don't burn your bridges behind you. And I would tell my student workers, when you leave and you want a letter of recommendation, you list my name. I said, "I don't write a letter of recommendation for you. You write it by each day's performance. So remember that you write your own letter of recommendation. So always put your best foot forward."
We have to take a station break really quickly. We're going to take a quick station break, and we'll be back with Ms. Locklear.
The family restaurant, located at 560 Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune Boulevard in Daytona Beach, carries a variety of dishes including buffalo wings and full salads. For the diet conscious, the family has a variety of broiled options such as broiled chicken, leg quarters, extra jumbo shrimp, broiled fish fillet, and much more. Combo meals with your choice of side and drink are available. For more information, directions, and a full menu, thefamily.com or 386-316-2897. That's 386-316-2897. The Family Restaurant, where there's nothing better than food but good food. Go Weave and Beauty Salon is located at 555 Fairmount Road in Daytona Beach and is open Tuesday through Saturday from 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. They offer weaves, haircuts, and styling. For more information or directions, 386-453-7966. That's 386-453-7966. Or online at goweave-hair.com. That's goweave-hair.com. Go Weave and Beauty Salon. Our seniors often need legal representation. Attorney Erica Johnson of Johnson Law Center devotes her practice to the legal needs of our seniors. She primarily focuses on wills, trusts, powers of attorney, bankruptcy, Social Security disability, and guardianships for the elderly. Attorney Erica Johnson also represents disabled elderly veterans, families who have lost a loved one, and seniors who need Medicaid for nursing home care. For more information, johnsonelderlawcenter.com. That's johnsonelderlawcenter.com or 386-232-8447. That's 386-232-8447. Johnson Law Center, serving our seniors.
Dollar Trend Incorporated, located 1236 8th Street, Daytona Beach in the Derby Plaza. This is a Dollar Plus store and groceries are available as well. Dollar Trend Incorporated is open from 9 a.m. till 11 p.m. 7 days a week. For more information, call 386-872-7792. That's 386-872-7792. Dollar Trend Incorporated.
Dollar Trend is now selling African products.
Tune in to Daytona Beach Radio with your host, the Reverend Dr. L. Ronald Durham. This is the city's most exciting news and information program here on Joy 106.3 every Wednesday beginning at 12 noon. Don't miss it.
TLC Laundry Services is located at 1025 North Nova Road, Unit 112 in Holly Hill, and offers wash, dry, and fold services for all your laundry. TLC Laundry Services also accepts drop-offs with same-day or next-day pickup. All laundry supplies are included with your order. They also provide dry cleaning services. For more information or directions, 386-517-4056. That's 386-517-4056. TLC Laundry Services at 1025 North Nova Road, Unit 112 in Holly Hill. No downtime, no fuss, no mess.
Special thanks and support to WAIG comes from R.J. Gaines Funeral Home, where Alexander C. Wynn III, licensed funeral director and owner. R.J. Gaines Funeral Home provides full burial services, entombment, cremation, transporting services, pre-planning arrangements, and consultations. R.J. Gaines Funeral Home is located at 804 Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune Boulevard. R.J. Gaines Funeral Home, 386-253-7686.
Good evening. We're back with Senorita Locklear, who was the private secretary to Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, or Mrs. Mary McLeod Bethune. And we want you to tell us the story about Rollins College.
Oh, yes. She told me Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida is an exclusive college, and Dr. Hamilton Holt was the president of Rollins, and that was in 1927. It was in the 20s, and they were very close friends. And Dr. Holt invited Mrs. Bethune to speak at Rollins College without getting permission. And Mrs. Bethune said that he came over one day and he told her, Mrs. Bethune, I spoke hastily. I asked you to come to address our students, but when I presented it to them, they said a Negro had never spoken there and no one ever would. He said, but if it means my job, he said, I ask you to come, and I want you to come. And she told me that she said, no, Dr. Holt, you can do more for Rollins College during your tenure as president than I could ever do by speaking once to the students. I know where your heart is, I know how you feel, but I will decline. I just will not attempt to come. 20-some years later, they awarded her an honorary degree, and she was the first black to be awarded an honorary degree from Rollins College, and she said that was in 49, I think. But the times changed.
Yeah. Was Dr. Holt African American?
No, it was a predominant. It was an exclusive private school for whites. And
so he really was taking that.
Yeah, he was. She told me that he told her, if it means my job, I ask you to speak, and I'm not going to back down. And she said no.
I think the mayor graduated from Rollins.
I think so, yeah.
The mayor of city,
Derek
really? Henry, yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, at that time, it was private, exclusive. I mean, you had to have money. It was Rollins College at that time was exclusive, white. But the president and Mrs. Bethune became great friends because of their backgrounds, their interests, and not knowing that they would not accept her, he invited her on his own.
So we don't have much time, but I want you to talk about how you encourage young ladies to become secretaries and not just typists.
I encourage them, by, as I said, by telling them, well, I have a meeting with them when they first start, and I explain what the duties are and what being a secretary means. And in fact, my students could not answer the telephone unless they had been in, and I heard them, because you can't, when you answer the telephone, you've got to speak correctly. You
You're like looking at it.
Yeah. And you have to know what to say, how to say it, and what. And they would have to practice. They didn't just walk in and answer the phone when they began students. They had to be trained as to what to say, how to say it, and I would always tell them that grammar, spelling, appearance, and I would say, I'm not looking at how much it costs. I'm looking at the quality, clean, neat, no shorts. Some of them would allow their students to work in the office with no shorts, no thongs, no halters. They had to know how to dress.
Yeah, thongs back then, Senorita?
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes.
That's not new.
Well, no. This was, I didn't retire until 90.
That's true. I graduated in 90.
Yeah, y'all was in the halters.
I didn't come. And the importance of listening, understanding, grammar, spelling, meeting people, and I have had several. One student called me last summer because she came for homecoming and she came back to see me. She had gotten a promotion and she said, "You know where I got it from?" She works for the United Methodist Church.
Oh,
She
wow.
knows that. And she said, "From you."
Uh-huh.
She said, "You taught me everything that I know what to do and how to do it."
Mm-hmm.
And I just want you to know that I appreciate it.
Oh, wow.
And when I retired, several students came. In fact, one young man even came from Ohio to my retirement party
Oh,
because
wow.
they never forgot how I taught them, how I was understanding and all of that. And I enjoyed it.
And so how long were you at Bethune-Cookman College?
43 years.
Good
43
Lord,
years, Jesus.
43 years.
Yes.
And how many presidents did you go through?
3.
And who were they?
Dr. Moore, Dr. Bronson, and Mrs. Bethune.
You worked for Dr. Bronson during his whole tenure?
Oh, no.
Oh.
Because 90, I guess.
Okay.
When did he retire?
2000 something, wasn't it?
Right.
When
Yeah,
Reed came.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's
You had already
yeah.
retired
Oh,
by the
yes,
time.
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Now, what was the difference between, we're running out of time, but what was the
Okay.
difference between working for a woman and working for a man? Is there a real big difference?
I didn't see a difference because, no, I did not see a difference. Well, I only worked for one woman, and that was Mrs. Bethune.
That was the best. Yeah.
And that was the top of the line.
Right,
So
hey.
I
right.
didn't, and in fact, she stood taller than. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. If I had worked for others, I could make a comparison. But with Mrs. Bethune, there's no comparison.
Mm-hmm.
No comparison.
So
She
would
believed
you,
in.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know.
She
what I was
believed in
getting-
what?
Huh?
What did she believe in?
She believed in perfection, just
Mhm.
like President Moore
Mm-hmm.
did. And, well, she was just warm, understanding. And I know she would tell some students, girls don't do that. You've got to be ladies. You've got to be respected.
Mhm.
And that's
But
that's
she
what-
worked in the spirit of excellence
all
the time.
Yes, yes.
All the
Yes,
time.
yes.
Even in the heat of battle.
Oh my gosh!
Even in the heat of battle, from what I've read.
Yes,
not like I knew it.
And
what I read.
and just like I said, they respect her because Mr. Davidson, he agreed to be treasurer of the Mary McLeod Bethune Foundation, and it started from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
But he believed in her, he respected her, and she was at his command, really. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That, when we talk about leaving a legacy, the university and the college is one thing, but a reputation is everything, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Because the brick and mortar can go away.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But your reputation is like a spirit. It lasts forever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you leave us with a pearl of wisdom for the young people out here today about what it is to leave a legacy and be involved?
Yeah, it is, because you have to demand respect, honesty, and above all, believe in the man upstairs.
All right.
And Mrs. one of her favorite things saying was, I am where I am today because God led me.
You're going to use that one.
That's right. Yeah, that's what you have to do.
Where I am today because God led me.
That's right. That's what she said. Yeah.
How do you remember all this stuff?
No, I don't.
Oh my God, that is just fabulous.
Some other things.
And how young are you, Senorita? How young are you, Senorita?
I'm young enough, 94.
94 years old. What a blessing.
Let me tell you, audience, she has key notes written down. She has a memory like you cannot believe. None of this stuff was all written down. She knew most of it.
Oh, but let me tell you this. I'm going to say this. When I thought about family, when I said she loves her family, when I came to work for Mrs. Bethune, there were 3 people there. There was Miss Georgia, a niece who was the housekeeper. There was Lucille, who was the grandniece. She was the cook. And Donald Bethune was a little boy in elementary school. I think he was in the 2nd or the 3rd grade. He was a Bethune. That's why I'm saying she loved family. Donald was Albert's son, but it was out of wedlock.
Okay.
And when Mrs. Bethune heard about it, she told me, because he was there when I came, but when she heard that Albert had a little boy out, she got him. And he stayed with her until she passed away. The only thing was, he was not legally adopted. So when Mrs. Bethune passed, he went back to his mother. But she loved him. She cared for him. He was slept upstairs, everything, and he was a Bethune. She loved family. So she took him. Donald? Yes, Donald, and he's still in Daytona Beach.
Hey, Donald. Well, we have to go. It is 9 o'clock, and Mrs. Locklear, it has been such a pleasure. I do hope you will come back and see us. Do you have any parting words you'd like to say, really quickly?
You.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yes, you.
Pray for me.
Pray for her. Thank you, family. This has been a fresh conversation.
Yes,
Good night.
Has been. Good night.
WAIGLP, Daytona Beach, Joy 106.3.